What's up, everyone? Chris Yandel here for Channelfireball.com, and welcome to another edition of Audio Articles, where we bring you articles written by the top Magic the Gathering pros in audio form Monday through Friday, so you can listen on the go wherever and whenever you want for free. We've got a lot of really great content on YouTube as well, so head on over to YouTube, search for Channel Fireball, and ring the bell next to the subscribe button. We want to make your listening experience as easy as possible, so if you have an iPhone, ask Siri to play the most recent episode of Channel Fireball's podcast, and you're all set. Today's episode is written by Paulo Vitor Dama de Rosa. He's going to talk about blue-white, but not the control version. Thanks for being with us today, and here is Blue-White Cycling by Paulo Vitor Dama de Rosa. Two weeks before Pro Tour Dominaria, I played Standard in GP Toronto. I played Blue-White Cycling, a deck I already liked pre-Dominaria and believed to be particularly well-positioned. It isn't a very popular deck at the moment, but a lot of people asked for my list when I got in a feature match, and I think it's quite a bit better than people give it credit for. It's especially good in Unified Standard because it has a better matchup in control mirrors, and almost a third of all decks in Unified Standard will be control. Here's the list that I played. Blue-White Cycling. For lands, 4 irrigated farmland, 4 glacial fortress, 9 plains, 7 islands. For spells, 2 seal away, 4 drake haven, 3 renewed faith, 4 cast out, 4 hieroglyphic illumination, 3 settle the wreckage, 2 fumigate, 2 countervailing winds, 2 search for Iskanta, 3 Teferi hero of Dominaria, 1 forsake the worldly, and 4 censor. In the sideboard, 2 forsake the worldly, 3 negate, 1 search for Iskanta, 1 fumigate, 2 authority of the consuls, 1 seal away, 1 abandoned sarcophagus, 2 torrential gearhulk, 1 sorcerer spyglass, and 1 ether meltdown. So why play blue-white cycling over blue-white? Whenever someone mentions blue-white cycling, they have to defend the position of playing that over regular blue-white. For many, blue-white cycling is just a gimmicky blue-white, whereas I think of it simply as a different blue-white. It has weaknesses in some areas, but it also definitely has strengths. Blue-white cycling has 2 big strengths compared to regular blue-white control. The first is that it's better in the mirror. Drakehaven is a 3-mana win-the-game type of card, and the other control decks don't have anything that compares. It's cheap, so you can fight over it, and you also win the cast-out fight because you have 4 of those and a Forsake the Worldly. The many cyclers and illuminations make sure you hit your land drops and find your power cards, which is also an advantage. Simply put, you have more cards that matter than most blue-white decks, and they're cheaper, which lets you be more proactive. This advantage is magnified if you play against non-blue-white control decks, such as blue-black or mono-black, since they don't actually have any ways of dealing with Drakehaven, and often literally cannot win if one ever resolves. The second strength is that you have a much stronger aggressive component, and you can punish people for tuning their decks and playstyles to beat the regular blue-white control deck. Against straight blue-white, good players can often maneuver the game around Settle the Wreckage or Fumigate by playing conservatively, but they cannot afford to do that if you have a Drakehaven in play. They're basically forced to shove every turn, at which point Settle the Wreckage or Fumigate is lights out. You can also punish people for playing with too many cards that are traditionally great versus control. This is especially important in sideboarded games, where people overload on Duresses, Argyl's Bloodfast, and Lifecrafter's Bestiaries, and then just die to a bunch of Drake tokens. At the GP, I regularly beat active Bloodfast and multiple Bestiaries by simply attacking through them, and I ended games where my opponents had 6 or 7 cards in hand and ample mana, which is not usual for blue-white decks. Regular blue-white decks can have aggressive avenues of attack in the post-boarded games, History of Benalia for example, but those are mainly good versus control and not versus something like mono-green. As a bonus, this deck has no time problems whatsoever, which makes it much easier to play on Magic Online than the version that relies on decking. Another sub-point of this is how well the card Drakehaven specifically matches up against Duress. Drakehaven lets you make a token whenever you discard a card, for whatever reason, including their Duresses. Most people don't know or don't remember this when they're in the middle of the game. If you can stick a Drakehaven, or sometimes 2, it becomes very hard for your opponent to win any sort of grindy game. The third strength is that you have life gain. The blue-white deck doesn't have any way of gaining life, and it often controls the game to end up being burned by a shock or walking ballista. With blue-white cycling, you have renewed faith, so you really lock up the game. It doesn't come up that much, but it is relevant. The deck also has some weaknesses. The first of them is that your cards aren't necessarily as powerful as those that are in blue-white. Countervailing Winds isn't a bad card, but it does come up that you want to counter something and can't. Illumination is nice, but it's usually worse than Glimmer of Genius. The second weakness is basically that you have to play fewer lands than other blue-white decks, since you cycle so much and you can't risk flooding. So sometimes you stumble on mana and you have to tap out to cycle early on, which means that you can't react to their board and will fall too far behind if they don't play into a sweeper. On top of that, you have a lot of color commitments, which limits your ability to play Field of Ruin for Search for Azcanta Mirrors, as well as any other utility lands such as Ark of Veraska or Memorial to Genius. Whether the pros outweigh the cons will depend on some things. If your metagame has a lot of control decks, then I think Drakehaven is superior. If it has a lot of green decks, then I think straight blue-white is likely to be better, as those decks are better at ignoring the drakes. I also think Drakehaven is better against black-red, and that's a slower deck that can't punish you nearly as much for casting Drakehaven early on, and that often boards into the cards that Drakehaven beats, the black cards. Whereas against straight mono-red, it's not nearly as effective. I also recommend Drakehaven if you're a slow player and you're having trouble with closing out the game, even with Gearhulks. This deck is interesting to play in that it offers 3 distinct playstyles. The first one is the Drakehaven playstyle, which consists of casting a turn 3 Drakehaven and using it to take control of the game. The Drakes can block and pressure Planeswalkers, so it's not easy for your opponent to beat it unless they already have a big board by the time they come down. This means that this plan is better executed on the play. If someone's first play is a 2-drop and you censor that and play a Drakehaven, then you can often just race anything they have. Some people dislike the fact that you expose yourself to removal that would otherwise be dead, Fatal Push, and Unlicensed Disintegration, but I honestly think that's okay. You give them targets, but you don't truly care if they kill the Drakes because you have so many. When you have the Drakehaven in play, you want to make sure that your turn 3 is Drakehaven and your turn 4 is double cyclers. This means that you do not want to cycle a turn 1 Censor, Illumination, or Cast Out, but you do want to cycle a 2-mana cycler on turn 2 if you aren't doing anything else, because you need to make sure that you hit 4 lands and 2 1-mana cyclers. Once you pass with the Drakehaven and 4 mana up, it becomes hard for the opponent to do anything, because you can always react at instant speed. The 4 mana can represent 2 Drakes, a Counterspell, a Settle, a Seal Away, and so on. Most of the time, the Drakes mean that the opponent cannot afford to play around a sweeper. If they go slowly, they'll simply lose, so Drakehaven plus Settle the Wreckage or Fumigate is game over. The second playstyle is the Teferi playstyle. This consists of dealing with the board 1 threat at a time and then dropping a Teferi. With this plan, you want to make sure that you spend your mana every turn dealing with their threats if you have to, always before cycling. For example, a curve of turn 2 Censor, turn 3 Countervailing Winds, turn 4 Cast Out or Seal Away, or even Settle the Wreckage into a turn 5 Teferi is very strong. If you have a hand like this, don't cycle your Cast Outs or your Censors early on, just play them. If you have no Teferi but you have a Search for Azcanta, this also works. The third playstyle is the Sweeper playstyle. This happens when you fall too far behind and cannot afford to answer threats on a 1-for-1 basis. In spots like this, you sometimes have to give up any pretense of dealing with them, and instead just try to win with sweepers, which means that you cycle aggressively to try to find them. This is often the case when you're on the draw, and your counterspells match up badly versus what they are trying to play. Censor and Countervailing Winds can both be played around if you're on the draw. So for example, in a situation where the opponent already presents a big board and they play another threat, it might be better to just cycle Countervailing Winds to try and draw Fumigate. With the dominant performance of red decks at the Pro Tour, I'm considering doing something I've never considered before, moving a Drakehaven to the sideboard. I like Drakehaven against red and other aggressive decks on the play, but on the draw it's just too slow, and drawing 2 is bad. I'd rather just sideboard it in on the play and leave it out on the draw. It's also the kind of card that gets much better post-board against a lot of people, because they side in cards that are good against control, but weak versus Drakehaven specifically. Here's the list that I'd play right now. Blue-white cycling. For lands, 1 Field of Ruin, 4 Irrigated Farmland, 4 Glacial Fortress, 8 Plains, 7 Island. For spells, 3 Seal Away, 3 Drakehaven, 3 Renewed Faith, 4 Cast Out, 4 Hieroglyphic Illumination, 3 Settle the Wreckage, 2 Fumigate, 4 Countervailing Winds, 2 Search for Azcanta, 3 Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, 1 Forsake the Worldly, and 4 Censor. The only other change in the main deck is the inclusion of 1 Field of Ruin. This deck hates colorless mana, but it's very important to have it in Azcanta Wars, and now that you have Teferi, it's good to be able to shuffle their deck if you get rid of something important. I think that the deck could play a 25th land, perhaps another Field of Ruin, but I'm not sure what to cut at this point. I think the easiest card to cut right now is the third Renewed Faith. Sideboarding. For the sideboard, I'd like to add a couple of 2-mana creatures, either Baral, Chief of Compliance, or Knight of Grace. I think the only way that you realistically lose to another control deck is if they tempo you out with History of Benalia, and having a 2-drop puts a stop to that. Baral is very good with Counter Wars, and you also have Illuminations that are better if they are cheap. But Knight of Grace can block anything against red decks, most importantly Scrounger, so it's better there. Knight of Grace also blocks Knight of Malice out of a potential blue-black sideboard, which Baral might not be able to do, since you'll often have a white permanent. You don't need a 4th Seal Away in the board, but you do want the 4th Drakehaven for when you're playing against control or you're on the play. I think you can easily cut the 3rd Fumigate. It was meant for the green decks and snakes, but those decks have so many non-creature threats in the post-sideboarded games that you don't need to flood your deck with rats. Past that, you need to cut another card to fit the other 2-drop. At this point, I'm leaning towards cutting the Search for Azcanta. So this would be my sideboard, knowing that there's a chance Baral is better than Knight of Grace. Sideboard. 2 Forsake the Worldly, 3 Negate, 2 Authority of the Consuls, 1 Seal Away, 1 Abandoned Sarcophagus, 2 Torrential Gearhulk, 1 Sorcerer's Spyglass, 1 Ether Meltdown, 2 Knight of Grace. Sideboarding with the deck will almost always change depending on whether you're on the play or on the draw. On the play, the Drakehaven plan is great against almost anybody, but on the draw, it's too slow. You also tend to need cards like Settle the Wreckage and Fumigate more if you're on the draw. This leads to some unconventional sideboard choices, such as cutting sweepers against black-red, but I think it's correct, especially because most people will never play around you not having sweepers. Overall, I'd strongly recommend against following strict sideboard notes with this deck. Your opponent's deck composition and even the way that they play should influence how you sideboard. Some decks will have more targets for Forsake the Worldly, for example, and you should know to bring it in or take it out when that happens. A few general rules. Number 1. Drakehaven is better on the play. Number 2. Search for Azcanta is better on the play. Number 3. Countervailing Winds is better on the play. Number 4. Settle the Wreckage is better on the draw. Number 5. Ether Meltdown and Seal Away are better on the draw. Number 6. Gearhulk is good versus everyone who isn't red. Number 7. You never take out Censor. Number 8. Authority of the Consuls is only there for strictly mono-red, not red-black. Number 9. Forsake from the sideboard is at least okay versus almost everybody, as many of the sideboard cards against you are enchantments or artifacts. Since it cycles, you don't even need that many targets, as long as you have a few good ones. And number 10, if you don't know what to take out Renewed Faith or Hieroglyphic Illumination. Sideboarding versus black-red. This is a better matchup than mono-red because they're slower and the sideboard plan they have for control to make up for that is less effective. They're not a rush deck, so you don't want Authority of the Consuls. We're going to take these cards out on the play. 1 Settle the Wreckage, 2 Fumigate, and 2 Hieroglyphic Illumination, and we're going to put in 1 Ether Meltdown, 2 Forsake the Worldly, 1 Sorcerer's Spyglass, and 1 Drakehaven. On the draw, we're going to take out 2 Fumigate, 1 Hieroglyphic Illumination, and 1 Search for Azcanta, and we're going to put in 1 Ether Meltdown, 2 Forsake the Worldly, and 1 Sorcerer's Spyglass. Playing against mono-red. Mono-red is a tougher matchup. An uncontested Bomag Courier is a huge issue, and they can more easily burn you out, so life gain is worth more. We're going to take these cards out on the play. 2 Hieroglyphic Illumination, 2 Countervailing Winds, and 1 Forsake the Worldly. And we're going to put in 2 Knight of Grace, 2 Authority of the Consuls, and 1 Ether Meltdown. On the draw, we're going to take out 2 Search for Azcanta, 1 Forsake the Worldly, 1 Countervailing Winds, and 1 Hieroglyphic Illumination, and we're going to put in 2 Knight of Grace, 2 Authority of the Consuls, and 1 Ether Meltdown. I like Search for Azcanta on the play, but on the draw, you need to react on turn 2 and cannot afford to take a turn off to cast it. This is a general sideboarding strategy, but how you actually sideboard will depend on their exact list. If they have Scroungers, for example, then Forsake is a good card, and Fumigate gets worse. Boarding against blue-white control. You're favored in this matchup because your threats are cheaper and you have more ways to win the cast-out fight. We're going to take out 3 Settle the Wreckage, 2 Fumigate, 3 Seal Away, and 3 Renewed Faith, and we're going to put in 2 Knight of Grace, 2 Torrential Gearhulk, 1 Drakehaven, 2 Forsake the Worldly, 1 Abandoned Sarcophagus, and 3 Negate. Knight of Grace isn't really good against them, but their best way to win is to cheese you out with their own knights and History of Benalia, so you need to hedge by adding your own. If you know for a fact that they don't have creatures, then you can just have Renewed Faith instead. Boarding against mono green with a splash for Scrounger. This is good pre-board and slightly bad post-board. It's hard to know exactly what kind of removal you want against them because you don't always know how they're going to board. Some people, for example, take out Llanowar Elves, which I think is wrong, and if they do that, you might want to cut Fumigate. If they don't have Scrounger, then Forsake is much worse, though they still might have vehicles and bestiaries. We're going to take out 2 Countervailing Winds, 1 Hieroglyphic Illumination, and 3 Renewed Faith, and we're going to put in 2 Torrential Gearhulk, 1 Ether Meltdown, 1 Sorcerer's Spyglass, 1 Seal Away, and 1 Forsake the Worldly. Boarding against Black-Green Snake. They're usually much more vulnerable to sweepers. If you draw Fumigate game 1 and your draw isn't otherwise horrible, you'll very likely win. Post-board, they have a lot of cards that are good against you though, so it gets trickier. On the play, we're going to take out 2 Settle the Wreckage, 1 Countervailing Winds, and 1 Renewed Faith, and we're going to put in 2 Torrential Gearhulk, 1 Seal Away, and 1 Drakehaven. On the draw, we're going to take out 2 Countervailing Winds, 1 Settle the Wreckage, and 1 Renewed Faith, and we're going to put in 2 Torrential Gearhulk, 1 Seal Away, and 1 Drakehaven. I don't like taking out all the Renewed Faith against them because you often get to spots where you only lose to Ballista, and then if you draw Renewed Faith, it's game over. So that's about it. I can't in good conscience say that this is a better deck than Black-Red. It's probably not. But if you're interested in playing something else and you like Control, you should give this a try. Again, I think it might be especially good in Unified Standard, since it will be better in the mirrors even if it's slightly worse versus the other 2 decks. That does it for this episode of Audio Articles. Make sure to head over to channelfireball.com and leave Paulo a comment about what you thought about today's article, or you can hit him up on Twitter at PVDDR. Paulo also started something called spikesacademy.com where he teaches people how to play Magic the Gathering. He also does coaching, and you can DM him for details. Also, make sure to check out cfbevents.com. You'll find all the information about the upcoming GPs there. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope to see you soon. And until then,